I close my eyes and seize it. I clench my fist and beat it. I light my torch and burn it. I am the beast I worship. Hi everyone. Welcome back to the Deep Discog Dive. And before we get started today, I wanted to give a quick programming note. You might recall in the last Deep Discog Dive that I said you could leave a comment suggesting the next artist or artists you'd like to see covered. I did not expect so many of you to do the thing that I said you could do. And I am so appreciative that so many of you want to see artists covered on this series, but it made me realize that I couldn't just go on sifting through the comments. It wouldn't be the most accurate way to do things. And so I'd like to announce the first ever Deep Discog Dive poll. I really wanted to keep the alliteration, but I just couldn't. In the description of this video, you'll find a link to a poll where you can go and vote on which artists you'd like to see covered. You are still more than welcome to leave comments suggesting artists and elaborating on why you'd like them to be covered, but if you want an official say as to who gets covered, that's how. Today's artists didn't need the poll though, because they've been suggested to me since the first episode of this series. That's right, today we're finally talking about Death Grips. Let's dive in. Death Grips is composed of Zach Hill on drums, Andy Morin producing, and of course, Master of Ceremonies Ride. The group released their first song in December 2020, and their first EP a few months later. Even from the start, their work was influenced by heavy metal, punk, hip-hop, noise music, as well as their experiences living in the underbelly of Sacramento, California. In their own words, poverty and bass. Over the past 10 years, they've released 6 studio albums, but their discography is a lot more fluid than that, so I'll be breaking this video up into chunks depending on whatever the most recent full-length project they've dropped is. Also, as a general disclaimer, I try to keep these videos as accessible to all ages as I can. With this particular band, it was quite difficult to do so. So if I cover something in a slightly obtuse way, or if I beat around the bush with something, that's why. So let's pop on their debut project, which I'm sure will be oodles of fun. Good lord, this thing is a wrecking ball. It's easily the band at their most unrefined, but with each member pushing their musical contribution to its most extreme, it's an incredibly potent debut. I was also surprised at how effectively the band uses rhythm, and how even when they're using timbres and textures that sound like they're trying to rip your ears off, they often pair them with a very ear-grabbing rhythm that helps you keep track of what's going on. This record is a perfect litmus test for any Death Grips newbie. It's not an easy listen by any stretch of the imagination, but if you can get through it and find things to appreciate, the rest of their work should be a cakewalk. After Exmilitary started blowing up on the internet, Death Grips were signed to Epic Records. I'm sure that'll go great. With their signing, they announced that they would be putting out 2 records within the course of 2012. The first one came out in April, and it's probably the one you know them for. With The Money Store, they took that raw aggression from Exmilitary and reined it in a bit to form something more refined and accessible. Their command of rhythm is still here, but there are moments where you might hear a melody, or dare I say, a hook? Overall, it's a really great project. I can see now why it has the reputation that it has. The band's second release of 2012 is certainly a different beast. The soundscapes are far more industrial. MC Ride sounds like he's ripping his own throat off. At least, more than usual. The most off-putting thing about this one, though, is its use of space. The mixes here are far more sparse than they were on The Money Store, and there's a dichotomous horror to them that no other Death Grips record really has. The cover itself is dichotomous too. It was taken at the Chateau Marmont where the band recorded the album, a regal setting featuring, what that censored bar is covering. Again, all ages. I respect this one, though I don't think I vibe with it as much as I did Exmilitary or The Money Store. But people were still excited, especially since they were giving this album away for free on BitTorrent. Don't these guys have a record deal? As it turns out, labels don't like it when you blow a ton of money by staying in the Chateau Marmont, or release an album for free on BitTorrent, or outright cancel a tour, so Death Grips were released from their contract in late 2012. Don't worry though, they started their own label, Third Worlds, shortly thereafter. Their 2013 was notable firstly for their stunts. They played a show at South by Southwest where Zach Hill Skyped in to play his part. There was also a Lollapalooza pre-show where the band didn't show up, instead leaving a playlist, a toy drum set, and a disturbing message that was sent to them by a fan. They announced the next day that they weren't even planning on showing up. What a wholesome experience. 2013 was also notable because of the release of their new album, Government Plates, which is pretty mid. This one continues the sparseness of No Love, but it feels more like a come down from that record, to the point where I would call this their most tame project. At least, you know, relatively. Look what we're talking about here. It's not bad by any stretch, but there's not much that sticks with me. One thing that does stick with me though, Robert Pattinson is on here. He plays guitar on Birds, and apparently he's a big fan of the band. I wonder what it was like for him to hear this band for the first time. In 2014, the band signed a deal with Warp Records and announced that they would be putting out a double album called The Powers That Be. The first half, N-Words on the Moon, would be released that same day, and the second half, called Jenny Death, would be released later on. They were also announced to be joining Nine Inch Nails and Soundgarden on a tour, so with all this hype and news surrounding them, they did what any reasonable band would do and retired. They straight up retired, they wrote out their statement on a napkin, they posted it online, and that was it. Though they did announce that Jenny Death would be their last project. So yeah, Death Grips had logged off, but man, what a career they left behind. Wait, what the hell is this? So yeah, in January 2015, they just surprise dropped a new album. No lead up, no indication if they were going to be coming back for real. Their ability to troll certainly was intact. Every track name on here consisted of the word runway followed by a letter, and if you read the letters top to bottom, it would spell out Jenny Death When, which was becoming its own little meme. Aside from the naming trick though, this one's not terribly notable. It's solid, but you wouldn't be remiss for thinking something was missing. Or rather someone. Because MC Ride is absent this whole time, it's a full instrumental record. And while Zach and Andy do good work here, it doesn't feel like Death Grips unless MC Ride's there telling me that responsibility's cool but there's more to life, like getting my all night. So yeah, Death Grips has logged the heck back on, and in March 2015 they put out the full Powers That Be, and I think it's their best work. For the first half, every song was produced using a Roland V drum kit, and every sample that they used was given to them by good friend of the band and the Deep Discog Dive, Björk. And man, to hear Björk's distinct vocals, chopped and warped and coming at you from every single angle, this might be the most delirious thing the band's ever done. For the second half, the production is a little more conventional. You know, relatively. The most notable thing about the production though is the band bringing in more electric guitar, which goes in tandem with a greater punk sensibility. It's the first time where I listened to the band and could imagine them all playing at the same time in the same room. It adds even more to songs that are already pretty killer for the most part, though I do have to shout out On GP, which might be the most emotionally affecting thing this band's ever made. These two halves come together to form the best Death Grips album in my opinion, though I don't think it's the one that you should start with. Later in 2015, the band announced their next album via a video where the actress Karen Black read lines from a script that Hill wrote. Before that album though, the band released another instrumental project called Interview 2016, which was accompanied by footage of Ride being interviewed by actor Matthew Hoffman, though you couldn't actually hear any of the interview. Matthew Hoffman was most known for Tuesdays with Matthew.
Tuesdays with Matthew is a program where senior citizens recreate famous scenes from famous movies, with the seniors starring serving as the leads.
Wait, this is so wholesome. How the hell did this guy get involved with death grips? I'm indifferent about this one. This one feels a lot like a spiritual successor to the Money Store in that it takes the stylings of the past few records and combines them into a more accessible whole. It's not bad. Spoiler alert for the rest of this video, I don't think Death Grips have a bad album in them, but everything they do on this album I feel like they've done better on other albums, and thus this one doesn't really have its own identity. One EP and one tour later, they put out their, as of now, latest record, Year of the Snitch. I actually covered this one back when it came out in 2018. I went very in-depth on what I thought of it, as I am known for doing. So it turns out they don't sync up at all. 0 out of 10, it's their worst album yet. But short story, even shorter, it's good. It's like a melding of the band's more accessible side with the drugged out, surreal aesthetic of Government Plates. Plus their collaborators this time around were even more varied. The bassist from Tool was on here, Lucas Abela, Andrew Adamson, who directed Shrek. It's probably the slowest burn of their whole catalog, but I think it rewards with every listen. But also it doesn't sync up with Shrek, so 0 out of 10, it sucks.
What on earth was that?
Their only release since Snitch was Gmail and the Restraining Orders, another solid little release to commemorate Warp Records' 30-year anniversary, and that's it so far. Without a doubt, Death Grips has had the most erratic and unpredictable career trajectory I've covered on this series so far, and to follow along with it is one heck of a ride, even before you get to the music. But as I found here, their music certainly stands on its own, and their output reflects a band that has always pushed themselves sonically as musicians, and also conceptually as artists living in the 21st century. If you want to get into their discography, I highly recommend starting out with Exmilitary and the Money Store, and then the powers that be for the full Death Grips experience. As a reminder, if you want to go vote on the next artist I cover in the series, you can go do that in the poll that's in the description. But otherwise, that should pretty much be it. Now, back to my meditation. Now we've got all the coconuts.